Welcome to the podcast Running Toward. This podcast tells stories of ordinary people who couldn't look away once they saw the hidden crisis in foster care and the families impacted. Our guests share heartbreak that led them to take reluctant and unexpected small, faithful steps toward the most vulnerable in their communities. Not because they had a plan, and not because they felt ready, but because they couldn't unsee their pain. You'll hear how people living normal lives discovered that getting closer changed them. Their comfort mattered less, their grip on uncertainty faded, and their faith got feet in quiet, everyday ways. Ending the crisis for one or for all isn't a quick fix. It's a long, slow, often messy journey alongside one of the most overlooked and misunderstood groups in our community. Running Toward gives you a front row seat to the hidden crisis in foster care and the families impacted, and to the ordinary people who choose not to look away. Hey, welcome back to the Running Toward podcast. We're excited to have you again today. We get a couple for the second time on our podcast. So you get to hear about fostering from the perspective of both the mom and the dad, which is pretty exciting today. But they'll have a story that you've experienced or heard of, having your own plans and then having to pivot all those plans when things don't exactly turn out the ways that you envisioned them. Similar to my story. And when one door got closed, another door got opened, and they just walked through it with faith and are still walking through it even to this day. So I'm excited to have Josh and Kaitlyn English with us today. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Well, so let's just start off with you guys tell me, what does a normal day, a normal Wednesday look like in the English household?
Well, I guess mine starts usually really early. I'm typically up between like 3 and 4:30 a.m. to head off to work. So the real work starts at about 6 a.m. and I'll let Kaitlyn take it from here.
Yeah, so that means the mornings solely fall on me. We have 3 boys. They're 8, 7, and 4, and they're all in school. Thankfully, now all at the same school. Yes. So we get up and basically everyone comes to my room to get ready because we have varying levels of ADHD in our household. And if we're not, supervised in the morning, we kind of get derailed. So everyone heads into my room. We get ready, we get dressed, we brush teeth. We do smoothies in the morning. It's streamlining it as much as possible. And we head out the door and we drop them off at school at about 7, and they're there most of the day. And then we pick them up at 3. Usually we rotate whoever's available and home. And they come home and, we try to get some outdoor play in because with 3 boys, they need activity.
Who've been sitting still for too many hours.
Yes, so we usually play outside for about an hour, do homework, and if we have extracurriculars, that happens, do dinner, bed, bath time routine, and start it all over again.
Do it again, like I say.
Lots of outdoor play. It's usually about as much outdoor play as I can get away with until the 3rd call of dinner's ready. Or depending on how dirty everyone's gotten, it might be bath time before dinner.
Yeah. That's the frustrating part about winter in South Texas is I'm like, it cannot get dark at 6 o'clock. This is ridiculous. I need the sun out until at least 8 p.m. It's too much. But, so y'all, busy life, chasing a lot of kids, a lot of different directions. I have a child in my home who shall remain nameless, but also has ADHD. And so my phrase at home is A to B ADHD. That is what we say all the time because he's the same thing. A to C to F. I'm like, no. Just A to B. But yeah. So let's flash back. When did y'all start fostering? What year?
We were licensed in December of 2020, and we took our first placement in January of 21.
Okay. So let's flash back before 2020. What was life like before you guys entered the foster care season of your life? What was life like then?
We were both working full time. We were living in San Antonio. We were recently married, recently purchased our first home. We did a lot of fun stuff. We're both very outdoorsy, like to go camping, off-roading, dirt bikes, Jeeps, lots of hiking, being out in nature, things that Kaitlyn would call camping, but a tent isn't involved, so it's not quite camping. But we had a lot of great friends that were big into the outdoors, and so we kind of enjoyed our time trying to get away from the city as much as possible. Did a lot of stuff out on the lake and had a lot of fun, and were doing projects around the house and kind of just, normal new house, new married couple stuff. It was, looking back, it was really easy.
You didn't know how easy it was, though, did you?
Right.
Yeah. Anything else?
Well, I mean, about a year into marriage, we decided we wanted to start trying to have a family. And shortly, I guess after a year of trying to conceive our own child, realized that we were not successful, and started down that rabbit hole of trying to figure out what was going on. And I think we quickly realized that, there were some infertility issues. And so I think, in this season of trying to find our footing as newlyweds, we're also, trying to figure out, what life's going to look like down the road for us in growing our family. Something we always knew we wanted to do.
Yeah. So early on, you already had your plans, and that had gotten derailed a little bit and shifted. Little did you know how much more it was going to change from what you had planned. So in those, if you don't mind, talk about those early days and months when you're processing through. We've had a couple of ladies on our show that have wrestled through infertility and just the weight of that and the grieving of that. How did that play into then? Where does foster care enter into that while you're still grieving a vision of a life that you thought was going to happen and something that you thought was going to be easy to happen, and now it's not? And then where does foster care come into that story?
Well, so, I'm someone who likes statistics, and after finding out that our fertility problems were primarily a my fertility problems issue, like several other issues in our lives, it happens. After kind of coming to terms with that and understanding this is not a likely outcome, and that, there's things that can be done, and we did a lot of things, and we went pretty far down that road. And, at some point we were just we could take another step in this direction, or there was always this conversation that we had since before we were even really seriously dating. We were together and talking about our future and the kind of common things that we saw as our part of our religious beliefs, part of our desire to be part of furthering the kingdom. And we both had been very familiar with the need for homes for children that didn't have homes, that needed families. And so early on, we had talked about, at some point in our life that we wanted to foster and potentially adopt children or a child. And it was kind of talked about we'll get a few years of experience, have a few children, become super parents. And, once we're totally confident in our abilities and kind of been there and done that, then that's then that's the time to jump off in the deep end. And after a certain amount of time going down the fertility road and not really having a whole lot to show for it, it was we could keep going further with this, or maybe this is telling us that this isn't the direction we should go. Maybe we need to revisit what really matters to us. And we wanted a family, and it just kind of seemed like we were being steered in that direction. There were things along the way that it felt like maybe this is right. Maybe this is the path we're supposed to be on. And so we decided, let's start looking at this a little more seriously.
Yeah. So how was that for you?
Our fertility journey seemed a little bit longer to me than I think it did for Josh. Month to month, it was an emotional roller coaster,
right?
And really emotional. And I think we just kind of came to this fork in the road where it just was you can head this direction and ultimately, hopefully, be successful. But we had felt like we had tried so much, and it was just failure after failure. And so, as Josh had mentioned, we had kind of these gentle nudges over, I would say, the course of 2 to 3 years. It felt like from God, kind of pushing us in the direction of foster care. And, I think us as humans, as sinners, we try to take control of that and say, I know this is what you're pushing me towards, God, but I want to go this direction.
Right.
And so finally, I think we surrendered to him, and we said, okay, you're leading us in this direction, and we're going to go with it. And I think we both jointly felt in that moment when we both came to that realization, this like overwhelming sense of peace, that grief of ever having our own biological child kind of ceased to exist in a sense. At least for me it did. And it felt just like this sense of peace that we were headed in the direction God wanted us to go.
So what were some of those nudges that you can look back on now and see that God was slowly pushing you towards where you were eventually
So I
going
would
to go?
say the first one is I'm a nurse, and I worked in the pediatric ICU at the Children's Hospital, and so we are the Center for Non-Accidental Traumas. And so, straight out of nursing school, I went into that, and I think that's kind of where we both came up with this idea that we wanted to foster at some point. There's all these children, that I would see on a day-to-day basis that had open CPS investigations and needed homes and had no one sitting with them at their, most vulnerable moments besides an occasional caseworker.
Right.
So that I would say that would be the first, like, kind of hint that pushed us in that direction, which was before we got married, actually. And then the second one, I had switched to school nursing in hopes that we were going to be starting a family and a more realistic schedule for a mom. When I was leaving the high school I was working at, the nurse that was coming in to take my position actually was fostering and had adopted through the agency we ended up going with.
Wow.
And so at the time we had just found out about our fertility issues. And so I again, that little nudge. And so I started inquiring with her, like, tell me more about your story. Tell me what it entails. And again, didn't quite feel ready yet to take that leap. And so that was, gosh, what year was that? 2019, I think, early 2019. Then towards the end of 2019, we moved into the home that we're in now. I think, gosh, we met our neighbors, a matter of weeks of moving in.
I think probably the next week. We had
like 3 doors down from us. And they would take evening walks. And I swear, like, every few weeks they had different children with them.
You're like, what is going on down the
This
street?
woman has never been pregnant. What's good? And so we started talking to them. Long story short, they also are fostering with the same agency. And so that third nudge, again, at the same time as we're coming to this fork in the road as this decision we need to make with our fertility journey, that's kind of those felt like the 3 nudges for me.
Definitely. Those were really big. And, looking back, it's easy to say, oh, this happened, this happened, and this happened. And it was all pointing in the same direction. Wow. But even at the time, I think we were starting to realize that, more and more things were turning us in that direction. And honestly, the idea of not writing any more checks to fertility specialists, that also sounded great.
Yeah.
That was a great proposition. But I mean, really, I think a lot of it came down to what we saw as, successful kids ready to become parents and wanted a family, and we weren't having any luck with a family, and there were kids out there that needed a family. And we had just moved into our new home at the time, and there was plenty of room for kids, and everything was starting to line up. Again, looking back, it's easier to kind of see how everything fits together, but it was definitely, even in the moment, felt a calm, steady hand behind us.
Yeah, so I can imagine that time that's a lot going on at one time. You're newly married, you had a plan, you thought this was the way you're going to start your family and then foster later. Now God's thrown this pivot at you. Now you're looking back at all these signs of like, oh my gosh, now I'm seeing this and this and this. How was your journey in faith in that season? What were your conversations with God like? Were you mad because the plan wasn't going the way that you had? Were you, just trusting him? Kind of talk about that season of life.
Yeah, we were definitely in a season of waiting, and I don't know if anyone's ever been in a season of waiting, but it felt like it was never going to end. Uh-huh. And I definitely feel like it drew us closer to God. In times of need, I've always, relied more heavily on my faith. But it felt like I kept asking and praying for something and I wasn't getting an answer. And, it's like you said, easy looking back now, seeing he was giving me an answer all along and like giving me these subtle nudges, and it wasn't what I wanted to hear, so I wasn't listening to it.
Right.
But I definitely say, I would say it led us to grow closer to God and to each other in our faith.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely a challenging time. But I will say I'm most diligent in prayer when I'm asking for something. And
true.
as you know,
It's
as
true.
kind of sad as that sounds, I think it's pretty human. And we
Right.
were definitely really very emotionally invested in starting our family. And we've both been strong Christians for our entire lives. But in a time of need is really when I found myself reaching out more and more. And kind of like Kaitlyn said, we maybe didn't see it that way at the time, but we were hearing back. We were getting an answer.
Yeah.
It just wasn't necessarily the one that we were expecting.
Yeah. That's when you're like, give me an answer on this. Not that answer. Give me an answer. You feel like you had you have your answer that you want, but he's giving you a different one. You're like, no. I don't want to, not listening to that one. So, I've talked to tons of foster families, and one of the big pieces typically is what is your close extended family. What's their response when you start talking about, hey, I think we might pivot from, this journey and pursuing fertility this way to fostering. How did your network, your circle of people respond?
I have to say both friends and family have been amazing.
That's incredible.
They couldn't have been more supportive, more understanding, and willing to help. And even when they didn't know what help we needed, and we didn't know what help we needed at the time, but they were there, they were offering, and our church community as well, especially once we got our first placement, they immediately reached out, and we had meal trains, and we had a lot of people that through our church community that we could talk to that had been down that road and could maybe it was more just listening to our rantings and hearing our struggles more than just giving advice. But it was one of those things where you're under a lot of pressure and you're feeling a tremendous amount of emotions, and it's not something that just anyone is going to be able to understand.
For sure.
Certainly having the support from family and friends, and both the physical support and bringing meals and everything, and just someone who loves you and cares about you and wants to help you do something and be there for you in any way they can, that was tremendous. And the stress was really high. I wouldn't have been able to make it without them.
Yeah. Wow.
Just to piggyback off of that, I think we are very much open books about our journey, and we had been from the beginning. And so our friends and family had walked our fertility journey with us, and I think they were longing for us to have children as much as we were.
Right.
And so they were willing to help in whatever capacity, they could to make that happen. Yeah. They threw us a baby shower before we even, took a placement to help us, have everything we need in our home. So like Josh said, we could not have done it without our support system. And that's both sets of parents, that's our friends, our church community. I don't know how anyone fosters without a support system, to be honest with you.
Sure, a team sport. Absolutely a team sport. Yeah. So what was that first step you took in fostering journey? You said the fork in the road, you've chosen this path. What was that next step that you guys took?
I think for me, I think the thing that I feel like was the pivoting moment was, as I had mentioned, we had moved into our new home and met this couple down the street that was often having different children walk down the street with them. And so one night we went in their home and we sat down and, we were like, tell us more about this journey and that you've been on. Tell us more about the agency you're with. And I think we both left there with our eyes so big, can we do, I don't know that this is what we're supposed to do. I don't know if we can do that. But I think knowing that we had them as a resource just 3 doors down was such a comfort too, that I want to say within the matter of months after that, we decided to do our first intro meeting with our agency. And I think, again, because this had been such a long journey and so many nudges, it's not like we went into it lightly. We went into it ready to go.
Yeah,
I think
we made your decision.
Yeah, we were licensed in 3 months, I think, from the time we did our intro meeting.
Yeah, that's fast. But yeah, like you said, once you made the decision, you guys it had been a long process.
We were ready for something more definitive. We were ready for the next step.
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah. So you getting into foster care. What surprised you about it the most?
I'll let you take that one.
I think we have different answers on this one. But for me, I think what surprised me the most was the lack of voice foster parents have on behalf of the foster children, even though we are the ones that are with them the most. And I can understand that in some sense, because some foster parents, maybe aren't as invested as Josh and I were in the children that we
Or they have an agenda.
Exactly. But we were, we looked at every child that was in our home as, someone we hope to keep for forever, at least pour into them as much as we could in the amount of time they were in our home. And so, everyone that's a part of a foster child's case, is stretched very thin, I will say.
Yes.
Probably the least for that would be a CASA worker, but still, even then, at times, they see the child once a month, maybe at maximum. And so I found that really bothered me, that not only did we have very little say-so, but we felt like we were under a microscope on every little thing we did. I mean, just like a scratch, we felt like we had to report that.
You're a nurse.
Right. Exactly.
You're like, I really have to call in for this?
So
people pay me to treat children like this.
Right. So I guess the word, I hate to use it, but I really felt like a babysitter to these children that we loved so dearly and so much. But I'll let you answer.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if this would be a great answer to that question, but I guess I had heard over much of my life, I'd always heard, the system is so broken and it's so horrible, and it's all of this dysfunction. And I guess I had never really heard like a relatively concise explanation about what that really means. And I think after a while, I came to kind of the conclusion that the simplest way to sum it up is, when you have a child or children that find themselves in a situation where their parent or caregiver can no longer be taking care of them for whatever that reason may be, what you have there is a very complex situation. You have the child itself, which is a complex situation in and of itself, and you have it inside a family that has some level of dysfunction in it, which is another complex situation. And that family probably exists without the support structure that most families historically have had, which is another complex situation. So all these things are layered. And the system that we have in place to deal with that is a very complicated system. And complicated systems and complex systems kind of sound like they may be similar, but they're not. One is adaptive and capable of doing amazing things and doing crazy things. And another is more like the mechanism of a clock. If every cog is working and functional, then the clock is going to do what you expect it to.
Right.
But expecting a complicated system to swoop in and solve the problems of a complex system is something that does not work. And
does not.
It's a tragedy in the very meaning of the word tragedy. And that's kind of hard to accept. But, when you look around and you see all of the holes in different things and people falling through the cracks, I think that's the most kind of comprehensive, simple explanation about why it almost has to be that way.
Yeah. No, I've never heard it said that way, but that makes a ton of sense, because it is a very complicated system with an incredible amount of layers, and also bureaucracy and red tape and government and budgets and all the things. And frankly, these kids don't get anybody elected. So there's that piece too. I always say they have no voice, no vote, no voice, and so nobody really sees them. Those are the challenges with the kids that we serve. And then, like you said, as the foster parent, the ones who are seeing and can give voice, nobody wants to hear our voice. Which, again, there are reasons for that, because there are foster families that definitely do this for the wrong reason, and there's foster families that go into it with an agenda, which is not the state's agenda, which is how can we reunify the kids, which is always in the best interest of the kids if we can get them back safely. But yeah, I experienced the same thing. That feeling of like, wait a minute, you don't want to know what I think about what's going on here? I'm the one, they just came to my house for like 30 minutes and they get to get up and testify. That was the wildest experience.
Yeah, with our first case, I will say I think that's more to what Josh is speaking to. We felt like we had no say-so whatsoever for the child that was in our home. I do feel like with our second case and the children we ended up adopting, I definitely felt like while we didn't get to speak on their behalf, those that were a part of the case very much listened to our opinions and our concerns and spoke to the judge on behalf of us.
And I think we were a little more comfortable being assertive and pushing a little bit. You know, maybe we didn't officially have a say-so in something, but when we were speaking with the people who were representing the kids, we were a lot more comfortable saying, like, you know, this is what we're seeing. This is how we feel about this. And I think they were pretty responsive to us. But you know, when it comes to like the perspective and the life of a child, it's basically a question of morality. It's what's right and what's wrong, or at least what's our best estimation of what's right and what's wrong. The system has to answer the question of legality. What is legal? And that is a different answer to a different question.
Very different answer a lot of times, for sure. Yeah. So off of the system for a minute, let's go back to what's going on in your home. You're taking in kids. You guys have started fostering. How did you learn to love kiddos that there was a real risk that they weren't going to stay forever?
I think that comes back to we felt God called us to this, called us to serve as foster parents, and also wanting so badly to have children of our own and start our family, that we felt like we are to love these children like God loved us, no matter what length of time. And even if that's just for a few months, I want to impact this child and make a difference in this child's life, no matter what, no matter how long they're in our home. And I want to be able to lay my head on my pillow at night knowing that I've poured everything I can into this child.
Right.
Now, it was not always that easy. There were definitely very, very broken moments for us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and just thinking, you know, there's no way this child can understand it, but this child deserves a parent or parents that love them unconditionally and treat them like they are the most amazing, precious gift in the world. Right. And they need that. And it may break our hearts, but it's our duty to give that to them. And I'm terrible at quoting scripture, but I believe it's in James somewhere. When you invite a child into your home in the name of Christ, you're inviting Christ into your home or into your life. And I think we tried our best to just not think about what might be down the road, but we have this child here and now, and we're going to give them everything.
Yeah.
And I think, too, these children come into your home with attachment issues. You know, they've obviously had brokenness in their life. And so when you start to show them unconditional love and then it's reciprocated back to you, that only, like, you know, incentivizes you to pour into them more, you know, to build that connection with them.
Yeah. Yeah, it is one of those things that I hear in a lot of people here in the foster space as a reason that people do not foster. Because they're like, oh, well, I would love them too much. And depending on how snarky I'm feeling on a certain day as to whether I say, you know, well, we actually don't want psychopaths fostering, because people that can't love children, we don't actually want them fostering, because that's not going to your point, that's not going to help them heal from their attachment, the trauma and obvious attachment stuff that they're going to have because the mom that they were born to, maybe the dad too, they're no longer with for a season. And so that loving them and adults being willing to love them to the point that it hurts when they leave is actually exactly what they need to heal.
I will say it's not easy. And I think what was hard for us too is we felt called to this, right? And yes, we had a great support system, but they weren't necessarily called to this, and they loved on these children just as much as we did. And watching them have brokenness was really, really hard, even through our brokenness. We were able to rely on each other, but our poor parents that, you know, loved these kids just as much as we did.
We talked about, we're like, we literally signed up for this.
Yeah.
Like, we signed on the dotted line for this. And that doesn't mean it's going to hurt any less, but, like, you know, you hear people that they have an unexpected child and it's like, oh, it was an accident. This was no accident. Like, we chose this, and we were comfortable with that, and we knew that. But yeah, certainly watching friends and family fall in love with these kids too and treat them just like any of the other grandbabies running around. Yeah. That was something that I don't know that thought had ever crossed my mind until we encountered that. And that was a whole nother level of emotions to deal with.
But also those kids deserve that.
Absolutely.
You know, so it's hard. And I don't think any of our support system, our parents or our friends would would change our story either.
Right.
But it doesn't mean it was any less hard for them.
Right. Yeah. You kind of signed up for everyone. You're like, again, team sport. We're signing up. You're signing up.
We have good friends and family.
Well, yeah, exactly. You have to be able to do this. So how did foster care stretch or deepen your faith through for early months, even till present day? How has it changed who you saw God as, who you were as a believer or disciple, to where you are now, having a few years under your belt of all this?
I would say it certainly gave me a real, tangible example of there is a plan. It might not be pretty, it might not be comfortable, but it is good and it is comprehensive, and He will give you strength. Not that means that today I can just see everything as, oh, no matter how terrible this is, I'm sure it's part of the grand plan.
Right.
But I think it was a very vivid example that at least I'll be able, or will be able, to reference when we do find ourselves in times that are massive struggles and where everything feels like it's falling in on you at once. It's like, well, we have felt this way before, and we've seen it through, and we know that God's hand is in this and that He will give us strength. And I heard several times, there's that scripture, and again, terrible at quoting scripture, but that people often say that God won't give you anything that you can't handle. And a lot of people will correct that to God won't give you anything that He can't handle. And that means something. But it certainly doesn't make it more comfortable.
Right.
But I think having lived through at least a chapter in our lives where felt like everything was out of control, didn't really know where everything was headed, but ultimately you can look back and say, no, we were on the right path. We were on the right path. It wasn't a pretty one, but we were on the right path. I hope that gives us comfort in the future when
need it.
the next time that we need it. Yeah.
And I will say, to piggyback off of that, on the really hard days, there were gentle nudges from God, reminding me. It almost felt like his hand on our back saying, I'm here, I'm with you. I know today's a hard day, but here's a little reminder that I've got you, and you're right where I want you, and you're walking the path I've asked you, and you're doing a good job. Because there were days where we were like, are we still supposed to be doing this? Are we doing the right thing here? What's the long-term outcome of all this? And so I think it definitely grew our faith in that capacity. Yeah.
Yeah. So is there a goodbye, a case, or a season that still feels heavy or unfinished?
Yeah, absolutely. Our first foster placement we had for about 6 months, and everything looked like it was going to be an easy breezy sail through to adoption kind of way.
There is
thought
just
to run out.
Yeah.
And after 6 months, that changed. And I would say that was probably about the lowest low that since we have met each other when we were kids that we had ever experienced together. And it was really vivid because there were things like, we went from one child to none in the house. And
It's really quiet.
One child makes a lot of noise, and you don't realize how much you appreciate that noise until it's not there anymore.
Right.
And it's like you have all of these reasons to get up on a Saturday, even if there are no plans. And when that is gone, it's like, it's heavy. It's heavy.
Very.
And after a while, that same placement re-entered our home, and for another 6 months, and the same kind of thing. It looked like, well, this is, we went through a lot, and we've taken the long way around, but now we're heading in this direction. We're going to get through, the clock's going to run out, and we'll be headed to adoption. And 6 months later, things changed again. That same child broke our hearts all over again. And lots of life has happened since then, and there's been plenty of things that, depending on how you look at them, can be very beautiful and can also be very tragic. And it's certainly something that I think enters both of our minds relatively often, and our adoptive kids' minds as well. So, it'll have a presence forever.
For sure.
I will definitely say when that child was reunified the first time, that sense of grief was so heavy. It's a weird feeling. I can't imagine what it's like to lose a child, but it felt like that in a sense of like, I will not know how she's doing day to day. I don't know what she's going to do long term. And so, she was still physically on this planet, but out of our lives. But I will say, but God in this moment, because it shifted my thought of foster care. Instead of, having this tunnel vision of adoption and her being a part of our family, I was able to walk alongside that mom, and we were a mentor to her.
Wow.
And we still have a connection to the mom and the daughter. And I don't know. It really it shifted our view of foster care. And clearly, again, it was another moment of God saying, I know you have this plan for your life, but this is the plan I have for you in this moment. While it's very heavy and it's very hard, still to this day, I know it was part of his plan.
So speak to that. Did you guys go in with a preconceived notion of what you thought about the bio family, and then how did that shift with this case where you now got to be in relationship with bio mom?
So I won't go into too much detail, but it was a single mom, a young mom, a teen mom in foster care herself. And so she had no support system, and initially thought, she didn't want to care for the child. And so we felt like, and we were also told by the team, this was an open and shut case, right? You're a foster adoptive home, and it's going to work out. And we don't fault her at all, but she changed her mind. She decided once, she had time to, it was a young baby, get the baby out of her home and get her feet back under herself, that she wanted to try being mom. And, it took some time. It wasn't instantaneous that we, felt like we could have a relationship with the mom, but over time God worked in our heart, and I think God worked in her heart too. And we were able to build that relationship, and there were so many stepping stones that led us through this path that, like, you can't help but know that was God placing those stepping stones to get you there, right?
Yeah. So how did you, you kind of talked about caseworkers, and, you realize now that they're busy and stretched thin, and have a complicated system and complex layers in the foster care system. How did your view of caseworkers change over this years of fostering?
There's some really good ones, and then there's some not so good ones. And I think we were very blessed on the second and on our boys' case, because the caseworkers that we had, our caseworker and our adoption caseworker, were invested in what they did. And that mattered, It
makes all the difference.
It does. And our one with our little girl, it seemed like she was doing it for a paycheck, unfortunately. And a little bit to the demise of her and the outcome of her case, I think, too. So I definitely feel like the caseworkers that we had on our boys' case, because they were so invested in what they did, it changed the trajectory of the case.
For sure. Absolutely. There is, obviously, for people that don't know the foster care system, the judge ultimately makes the decision regardless of what everybody else thinks. But those caseworkers and CASA workers have a lot of influence in the courts. And to go back to your point of, like, not having a voice in the system, I always say it was a game I had to learn how to play. I just need to know who are the players and who do I need to communicate what to get whatever is happening in my house in front of the judge, the person who's actually making a decision. And that's where having community of other foster families is so critical, because you have people like me who, our first little girl we adopted, she's now in college. Like, we've been in this game for a long time, and I know how to play the game. And that's when you become that foster family that doesn't like go in guns blazing and get shut down because you're going to lose anyways, or the one that just sits back and does nothing because you're terrified of saying anything. But you're that one in the middle who learns how to, what do I need to tell this caseworker, this CASA worker, this person, so that when they go into court, they feel empowered because they did their job, and also the judge gets to hear what's actually going on and maybe hear some things that they hadn't heard before because nobody's telling them all the things.
I think if I have one regret along our road is that our little girl that we had didn't have a CASA worker. And so really the only person she had speaking on her behalf, to me, felt like her attorney, who I'm sure her caseload was overwhelming. So I think the one thing that I wish we would have done was really advocate and push more for her to have had a CASA worker, because I think that would have made a difference in the outcome.
Yeah. And I don't know what it is right now. I know a few years ago it was about 50% of kids in San Antonio will get a CASA worker. And for everybody that doesn't know, a CASA worker is a child-appointed special advocate, and they go into court, and they're basically the eyes and the ears of the judge and the voice of the child. And so really important person to the treatment or the team for the kiddo, but not all of our kids get that. And I know we had the same experience. We had attorneys that were incredible and fought so hard and were amazing, and we had ones that were just collecting a paycheck, and the child that I was serving was a last name on a manila folder that they were walking into court with, and they didn't seem to care at all, and to the disservice of the child and really everybody in this whole the bio family, us. They burn out foster families that way, and it's just really, we've gotten to be able to talk to a few of the judges, and that's one of the things they've said is like they can't rule on info they don't have, and that's the hard part of learning to play the game, so that you can get the info in front of them so they can rule on what on the full case rather than just the pieces they know. Looking back, what do you understand now about maybe the journey that God's taken you on, the foster care system? You can talk to any of it that you didn't understand 2019.
I think one of the things that has just become more and more obvious to me is that, as much as there are areas for improvement with caseworkers, with the attorneys, and I think a lot of that comes down to, how do you recruit talent for these positions? Not an easy position to recruit top talent
Right.
for a variety of reasons. But as far as the foster care system as a whole and just children and families as a whole, this is a problem that if it's going to be solved, which solving, that doesn't really need solved,
Right.
but
Well, it's be solved until Jesus comes back.
Sure. That I think that is really going to be up to a community as a whole, country, state, local, all the way down to, the neighborhood that you live in. We have got to encourage families to be strong, to stick together, to ask for help, and to have people around to ask for help, and to be in a community where you can do that. That's something that I guess used to be really common and seems to be less and less common every day that goes by. And we can put all of these people and systems in place to try to deal with the consequences when a family can't make it and struggles for whatever reason. But more focus needs to be put on protecting families, empowering families, giving them an outlet to reach out to for advice, and someone that they can trust, that they can talk to when they're struggling and can reach out to for resources, because it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. And trying to fix it after it's already reached the point where a child needs to be removed, that's something that everyone in a society that cares about it should be trying to minimize.
Right.
And, I don't know how you go about that. And in this country, families seem to be, becoming less and less relevant. And that trend needs to be reversed. I don't know what that looks like or why it's going in that direction. But there are plenty of kids that maybe their family is sufficient and their family life and their home life is good enough that they don't need any intervention. But that doesn't mean that it's as good as it could be.
Yeah.
And, as sad as it is to see kids that do ultimately have to be removed for whatever reason, there's still plenty of kids out there that are not getting what they need or what they deserve. And there will be consequences throughout life for that.
Yeah.
And more focus on helping healthy families become the norm is something that I think is a global problem. And if that isn't solved, that's without a healthy family unit, it doesn't really matter what you build on top of it. It's going to have problems.
Yeah, because we can't just keep treating the symptom and not the root cause. And the root cause is family. Always if you look at any society, when it starts to fall apart, it's the way that it treats its women and children, which means the family unit has fallen apart. The dads are not in the home, women and children are not valued, and then so goes the rest of the society, and it always crumbles. You can look at countries even right now and see that play out. But we can't be reactive. We have to be proactive and get upstream and help the families before the kiddos need to be removed.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anything else, Kaitlyn, on that question? Just looking back, so that you understand now that you didn't know, looking back to like 2019, about system, about faith, about fertility, about kids, about really anything.
I think one thing that I was told throughout our whole, training to become foster parents was that, kids with trauma bring a lot of baggage into your home, and they give you all these, worst case scenarios. And I was like, oh, okay, but that won't be our home. And while it's not really necessarily our home, trauma is real. Secondary trauma is real. And this is a lifelong, journey that our kids are going to be on. This is not something that they have done a lot of healing, and they have come a long way, but they still have a lot of healing to do over their life. And it's something we have to wake up every day and deal with and handle and walk alongside and help them heal. So that's something I guess I was told, but it didn't really resonate till we weren't in the thick of it.
Right. I think it's almost like an arrogance or a pride. I had the same thing where I was like, well, I mean, that might be for other people's homes, but we're going to love them differently, and they're going to be fine. We're going to fix them. Like, I have a system. I know how to love them. Like, we're not going to struggle with that. Like, I think all parents come to that. Again, I think the Lord was like, listen, we're going to humble you. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take you into foster care. Because that is, and the other thing that you guys will learn as you go along too, like I said, I'm 20 years deep now, is that it happens in new seasons. So as the kids get older, they'll overcome some things, and then they'll hit the teenage years, and they'll start dating, and then they'll overcome some things, and then they'll hit college, and then they'll have kids. Like, this is a lifelong journey that you get to walk out with them as they mature and process it in different seasons, because it's a long haul journey, because they're going to have to process, my mom and dad didn't do what they needed to do to get me back. Mm-hmm. My grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins didn't do what they could have done to take me. And there's a lot of grief and a lot of hurt and a lot of trauma. And sometimes they can get stuck in different seasons. Yeah. But that's where, again, this is a team sport. You have to have that community of people, because at some point they're going to stop listening to y'all because you're mom and dad. And you're going to want those cool aunts and uncles and mentors and coaches also speaking into them about who they are and whose they are, and all of the things that, any parent really needs, but especially when you're fostering or when you've adopted kiddos that the enemy's already tried to attack them in that identity space.
I think we say in our home, it's like 3 steps forward and 1 step back. Just when you think everything's going fine and dandy, you have a setback. So yeah. Definitely.
And with 3 of them, at least it is consistent. They usually take turns.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're real lucky, they'll take turns, but there'll maybe seasons when they just try to.
Sometimes they gang up on us, but they've been pretty polite. They
full send it.
Pretty consistent.
So I want you both to answer this question, but for Josh, for you, speak to the guy who is a dad, or who is a husband who he and his wife want to become parents, and they're in that infertility season. What would you have liked to have heard? What could some other man come alongside you and told you in that season that would have helped as you walked into this fostering or, journey?
I would say that, one of the things that I struggle with a little bit was thinking, I want my own biological kid. I want the little me, that's going to have my hair color and going to have my eye color and is going to, act like I did when I was little and get to raise it up into a big me. And I don't want to say that was necessarily a pride thing, but probably somewhat a pride thing. And it was a little bit difficult to put myself in the position of, no, I'm going to be raising someone else's child, and I'm going to be shaping and molding, someone else's child, and that will be my child, but it's not my biological child. And kind of having that that thought of, I'm kind of giving up on my lineage here, to some degree. There was definitely things that, there were definitely times where that kind of weighed on me. And I don't know if that's something that anyone else thinks about, but certainly for me, it felt like I was, kind of surrendering something that meant something to me at one point. But I can certainly say that after having some years now and seeing the smiles on my little boys' faces and getting to walk alongside them and teach them and have all of these milestones in their lives pass by, I don't know what it feels like to have a kid of my own to do that sort of thing with, but I can't imagine it could be any better than it is.
Right.
And, there's, I guess, things that we gave up, but we got so much.
Yeah.
And I feel like God had humor, at least in the kids he gave us. I can't tell you how many times we get that they look just like us. But not only that, their interests are so similar, and they came to us with similar interests. Our oldest, at 4 years old, could take apart a car, like one of those little battery operated cars, and put it back together. Josh is very mechanically inclined, like very similar interests and passions. And so, well, yes, they're not our biological children. And part of it is because of how we raised them so far that we've had them. But they are very similar to us. Like, I can't imagine that if we were going to have our own biological children, that they would be much different.
And I'll also say, if you're a man who thinks that you have a lot of patience and you enjoy a challenge, you will get to test those two things very thoroughly, and it will be humbled, and it will be amazing, and it'll be terrible. But if you like a challenge, this is a worthy challenge
for sure. Absolutely. Anything else that we didn't say that you guys would like to share before we get off?
I would just say, to answer that question as well, I know there were days through our fertility journey, through fostering, where I really felt guilty about the feelings that I was feeling in whatever capacity that was. But finding a group of women that are walking the same journey and being able to, say, hey, have you ever felt this way? Because I don't think I should be feeling this way. But feeling affirmed in those feelings, because you can't just talk to someone that hasn't fostered before. They're not going to understand what you're going through. So definitely finding a group of like-minded people that are walking that same journey will help you through the whole process, through infertility, through fostering, etc.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always would say, like, I have my normal friends and then I have my foster friends, because I'm like, let me draw this on a whiteboard for you. This is how this is all playing out. But my foster friends are like, oh yeah, I totally get it. So yeah, community is so important. It sounds like you guys have an incredible one, which makes a huge difference. And what an amazing story of just continuing to do the next right thing, not letting any of it, I'm sure there were days when you're like, so frustrated, you just wanted to tap out on all of it. But just being faithful in the doors that God did open and the path that he did point you and nudge you towards with the different things in your life. And now getting the privilege of being woken up at probably super early on Saturday morning to go tend to somebody's greatest need of the morning.
Our 4-year-old does not like to sleep in his own bed. So we're woken up about 2 a.m. every morning.
Yeah. Little built-in alarm clock there. Well, Josh and Kaitlyn, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you've enjoyed it, please give us a like or a comment and stay tuned, because we'll be back with another incredible story next week.